Hi there. I'm Emma Badame from That Shelf, which is in Toronto, Canada.
Hi.
I first want to say Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you so much for talking with everyone today. And congrats on Stonehouse. It really is an excellent story and way to kick off the year, I think. My first question is for Matthew. And after watching the series, we know a lot about kind of the whats and the hows of what Stonehouse did, but the whys still kind of remain a bit murky. He's still a bit of an enigma at the end of the day. How did you go about nailing down the character and who you thought he was so that you could approach and play him?
I think the honest answer to that is I didn't really. I just sort of play scene by scene. That's all you can do. You're playing little moments and you know when you read the script that it's cohesive and it makes sense and all the rest of it. So you sort of trust the director and to look after that, which I did. We had a wonderful director in John Baird, and so it was just really good fun and really interesting to chart that journey and go through it with him as the wheels slowly come off, and then trying to sort of get himself out of it and rescue his reputation, and fascinating story.
And the overall tone of the series is quite light and satirical and kind of heightened through most of those scenes. But I wanted to talk to you both about there's a kind of tonal shift in the third series or the third episode of the series, especially in the scene between Stonehouse and Wilson, their kind of last scene together. And I wondered if you could each talk about filming that scene in particular and where your characters find themselves at that moment. Kevin, if you want to go first and talk about Wilson in that time.
Well, I'm glad you bring up that scene, because it was that scene that made me realize when I read it that John Preston had wonderfully given the actor who was going to play Wilson, although a supporting role, had given him an arc, which is a nice thing.
Is that the spider in the corner of the room scene?
Yeah. The one with the awkward ending when you don't quite know when to leave. And I loved the fact that in quite a limited amount of scenes, we went from two really hopeful people who wanted to change the world and the country they lived in into two quite bitter, broken people. And it is one of the fascinating things about the last thing I say to him is that he gives this ludicrous speech. And Wilson genuinely says, I actually agreed with a lot of what you said, that we work in a toxic, horrible, mainly masculine environment in which you can't trust anybody. Even though he's done all these stupid things, he still goes, you've got a point. And that's what I loved about the scene. I absolutely adored it.
Yeah. Bit much, John, he said. Bit much, but
perhaps a bit much,
yeah. It's great.
No,
and very poignant, very moving when talks about going to the Charing Cross Road to kick a blind man. Would you do that for me if I asked
would you?
You?
Yeah, I know.
Sort of odd. Yeah, and it really works in this sort of.
Well, I questioned that line, and until John, and then John, the director, said he said that not necessarily to John Stonehouse, but he actually
but he said it right.
Yeah, it came out of his mouth, as did I'm the spider in the corner of the room. He said to journalists, which is really weird thing to say. I mean,
he said that to journalists.
He said that to two journalists who interviewed him just after he resigned. Yeah, right. Weird.
Yeah,
your turn.
Yeah, Matthew, if you wanted to talk about where Stonehouse is kind of at that moment after he's made that big speech to Parliament, and things are kind of moving in a different direction now for him.
Well, he's back, isn't he? And he's I think he knows his political career's over, and he's facing the trial. That's sort of happening at the same time, isn't it? And then he's in a mess. Barbara, his wife, has kicked him out, and he sleeps on a park bench in our story, and then wakes up to discover that Harold Wilson's resigned, and then he's sort of heading towards jail, which we don't, we show a little bit, but actually that was a whole fascinating story. We didn't have time to go into that, but he was so sort of pompous that he insisted on conducting his own trial, and he was advised not to do that by his lawyer, Jeffrey Robertson, who's a famous QC, and the judge, they said, don't do it because you'll wreck your chances of getting a reduced sentence. And he did it. He went ahead and did it and bored everyone to death for about 3 months or something, and got 7 years, whereas he probably would have got 2 or a suspended sentence. And
yeah. Well, and they say in that the even the judge it could have been a short trial, but
it drove everyone mad. They were there for weeks on end while he droned.
You want to alienate people? My God, I mean, bore the shit out of them for 6 weeks.
But that's an element. So there's a characteristic of Stonehouse which is all about his, I can do this. It's my thing. It's his sort of weird vanity.
Well, you talk briefly about Barbara, and I wondered if you could talk about some of my favorite scenes in the whole series are the scenes in Australia with Barbara and Sheila and John, that kind of a three-hander brings a whole new level of awkwardness to things, but it's also really funny. But then there's also kind of a line of seriousness under writing the whole thing. Can you talk about filming those scenes and working particularly with Keeley, who I'm sure you have kind of worked out a kind of shorthand now, and how that works when you're working together?
Yeah, there is a shorthand, but also she's just a brilliant actress, and it was just like anybody, it's just wonderful. But they were great fun, those scenes. Shot in Spain, doubling for Australia, and especially the sort of dreadful picnic that Sheila's prepared, and that's great because Barbara sort of something snaps. And still, John Stonehouse is trying to, normalize it and don't make a fuss. Don't please, Barbara. Sort of ridiculous, really. Great fun to play.
Well, and on Wilson's side, the woman that's kind of by his side through a lot of it is Betty Boothroyd, who I think is a fabulous character to learn more about, and I don't think she's as well known over here as she might be over there. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about Wilson's relationship with her? And it's interesting to kind of see him using her strength as opposed to John, who's kind of has Barbara and she's so strong, but he doesn't kind of see how to use that, considering he kind of uses everything else he comes across.
That's a very interesting point. I mean, Betty Boothroyd is sort of iconic here, and played wonderfully by Dorothy Atkinson. The only problem we really had was that she was much taller than him, so I tried to crouch a little bit while I worked with her. But it is wonderful, and talking about the toxicity of the sort of male environment of the House of Commons, she was one of the first women to really make a mark in the House of Commons, in the government of England, and as
she was speaker, wasn't she?
She became the speaker for many years. She became the speaker for many years, and was a very good one as well. But the idea that this working class man, that he's main prop and sort of main psychiatrist almost, was this northern working class woman. It's interesting as well that the journey that people had to go through in those days, they were both very working class people, and they both developed these rather posh voices. But when they became successful, they both went, no, I'll just be who I am, actually. Then that's an interesting little arc in itself that obviously is not in the show, but she certainly is a very inspiring character. And it was only at the last minute that we were allowed to call the character Betty Boothroyd, because we had to ask her permission, and she graciously gave it. So that was wonderful.
Really?
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was like just before we started shooting, she said, yes, you can make this me, because she had a look at it and read it and liked it.
Well, there's one other, actually, speaking of people not knowing Betty as well on this side, I wondered if one thing that doesn't cross over as much is also, how would either of you describe or explain Morris dancing to the uninitiated?
It's a kind of pagan celebration of something. I don't really know. What is it?
It's part of Easter. Which is Easter, which was the before it became a Christian celebration. It was the celebration of birth, when all the animals are having
it's an ancient thing, isn't it?
An ancient thing. And I actually was taught Morris dancing for a show at the National Theatre. And when you actually meet people who are Morris dancers, they are so obsessed. And my parents used to live in Somerset, and I once was at a pub with the Somerset Morris dancers, and they're so obsessed with their world. I think one of them recognized me off the television. He said, "Excuse me," he said, are you one of the Gloucestershire Morris dancers?" He said to me, because that was the only sort of fame he could imagine, whichever Morris dancing group you were in.
And they dress slightly differently, county to county. They're all quite.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, they have their colours. Yeah, they have their colours like a football team.
Yeah.
It's mystifying.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate talking to you today. And I'm excited to see everybody's reaction over here once they finally get to see it this week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.